Hey, what's up, everybody? A really, really, really interesting conversation here today with Trent McConaughey, who is at TrentMC0 on Twitter. Look, real quick guideline here, which is it's a very technical conversation, and that's a good thing because there are a lot of concepts, there are a lot of acronyms, there are a lot of different technologies and systems that are mentioned in this that I think you should familiarize yourself with because, as you'll see, by the end of this episode, you understand why it's all relevant and it's all going to be impacting you, whether you like it or you don't. Um, we basically are talking about AI agents, AI swarms, how the idea of decentralized data and infrastructure is all coming to either a blockchain by you or to a neighborhood near you. Um, but it really is a good way to conceptualize a lot of these big ideas outside of the echo chamber that we see on X day to day, and outside of the ecosystem, the echo chamber of basically like I know we have AI XBT and we all love it, and the mindshare is so great, but if you really step back, AI XBT is a pimple on the world that is artificial intelligence and agents. Um, but yes, please be prepared. It is a very technical conversation. And I implore you to still grit your teeth through it, listen to it, get a notepad, get a piece of paper, be able to pause this episode, search the things you don't understand. And I think it will be very rewarding for you. As always, thank you for tuning in and listening to another episode and interview with me. And let me know if you have any feedback, questions, or comments, and we'll see you on the next one. Peace. Let's jump into it right here. AI agents, this is again mindshare on this topic has only risen. It's currently still sitting around like 50% of the Web3 space, which is the space that I mostly operate in. Um, Trent Trent is one of those people that we have to talk to because of uh not only what's happening within like the actual AI space, but what leads into the use of AI, which is data. And the thesis that or a topic that most people talk about is if you put bad data into a model, you put bad data into any algorithm, you're going to get shit results. And that is one that I think many people have overlooked. Now, Trent is very active on the data side. He's very active on the DAO side. I think it's better if you explain everything you're involved in and your background. But I think that's the setup for today's discussion in from a 40,000 foot view.
Sure. The one line summary of my background is I was raised on a pig farm and then became an AI researcher. um, that's the very short version. The slightly longer version is, raised on a farm in Canada. From a very young age, was hacking on computers. When I was about 12, I discovered AI, so I started playing with that and reading about it and stuff too. Did EE and computer science degrees in university. Got summer jobs working for National Defense Canada doing AI. Actually, I couldn't believe my luck. This was 1997, and people were paying me to do AI. So I thought this was just really awesome, and I would be staying up late at night, learning it all, doing genetic programming and many other forms of AI. And then straight out of undergrad, I started a company doing AI for chip design, focusing on creative design of analog circuits. So this was, we officially founded it in 1999 and built it up, grew it, and it got acquired 5 years later by Synopsys, one of the leading companies in that industry, the industry of CAD tools for chip design called EDA. And then from 2004 to 2008, I did a PhD in Belgium, in K Leuven. It's an excellent university with a really top research group for that same topic, AI for chip design, focusing on analog circuits. And simultaneously, I did a second startup, AI for chip design too, but this time focusing on the verification side. I mean, back then there weren't that many industries where AI was really useful, but CAD tools is one of them, and electrical engineering was always sort of the bleeding edge of the CAD tools. For example, the famous simulated annealing algorithm was invented in 1984
Hmm.
or 83, I forget, by someone in the industry, Kirkpatrick, for all the placement and routing stuff. And even the modern optimizers for modern AIs, they're using variants of Atom, which is a variant of something called SPSA, which is a variant of simulated annealing. So there's a long history in all this stuff. Anyway, though, yeah. So I did a second company also for for circuit design and verification, and it went very well as well. And in this case, it was yeah, like we were doing parallel processing going back to the 90s as well, right? Machines with 100, 1,000 machines, like going boxes and stuff. We would have to write our own custom parallelization code, all of that, right? Um, and we managed to win the industry with our software. So 19 of the top 20 semis were using us, everyone from TSMC to design the next generation of Moore's Law with transistors to NVIDIA, Qualcomm, Apple, etc. And they use that software to this day with more and more products. And that company got acquired a few years later as well by Siemens
Hmm.
and one of the subsidiaries called Mentor Graphics. And then, so in 2013, I've been, talking about Bitcoin at length because I'm a big nerd. So I talk about Bitcoin and AR and VR. But soon after the Bitcoin white paper came out, some friends of mine tipped me off on it, and we would hang out and talk about it a lot. In 2011, I bought a very small handful of Bitcoins and lost those keys for like 10 years and recovered them a couple years ago.
Oh, that's good.
Um, yeah, I had to do about half a day of programming to it because the wallets are so old. But anyway, yeah, it's one of those happy stories. Usually you hear about people losing keys, right? And then, yeah, so in 2013, I started working on a project for essentially these days, you would call it NFTs, and it was on Bitcoin. We called the project Describe. We were working closely with professional artists, co-founded it with my wife. She's a professional curator, worked at the Louvre on all that.
Amazing.
And another good friend who had started banks for a living, a guy by the name of Bruce Pond. And we got pretty decent traction, but we were too early. So by 2015 or so, we were trying to do a Series A, and Web3 wasn't a thing yet. Ethereum had just been born, etc. And so our numbers were pretty good, like amazing by Web3 numbers, but not great by Web2 standards. So we had to pivot in order to survive, and we pivoted to doing a decentralized database, wrapping MongoDB with Tendermint BFT. And that was also well, yeah, the target customer for that, it's BFT, so it's like these federated setups as opposed to fully permissionless. And that was, therefore, enterprises were the target customer, but it was too
Right.
early for enterprises. So by 2017, even by 2016, we were like, okay, this is starting, BigChainDB, the product was called, but it was a bit too, yeah, it was too early for enterprises. And I was missing AI by this time, though, so I started writing about AI. I
I mean, the
wrote a
whole
few
theme the
articles.
whole theme here is you've just been very early to everything. I mean, because back in the late '90s even, like, the
Yeah,
AI stuff was for a very specific industry, and it wasn't, like, AI on a chip, it was AI to produce chips. It was actually using it for production, CAD, etcetera. Um, and
yeah,
then back to, like, on the NFTs
yeah,
or Inscribed, like, that is you were too early there. There hadn't been product market fit,
yeah,
I think you could argue, but that pivot was taking that same idea of how can we use the underlying technology, this underlying idea of, linking something to the blockchain or kind of like, I guess, permanently doing that, especially on Bitcoin, on the data side, like moving from data that's an image to
mhm.
databases and Mongo.
Yeah. I mean, there's a bit of that. I mean, I always I like to look at first principles and understand what the core problem is. We started a Scribe because people were coming to my wife, artists and collectors, and they were saying, one of them came to her and said, "I just bought this CD with digital art, or this DVD. Bought it a year ago and now it's scratched." They went to the artist. "I'd like another copy, please." And the artist is like, "I sold you the artifact. That's that, right?" So there's this confusion around what actually it was that was bought or sold, and it was really impossible to just sell a GIF or an image that's just the file, right? Because then
Right.
how do you what is the artifact then, right? And copyright laws are supposed to protect that, but the licensing wasn't really nailed down well in an art world. So one of the things we did was basically nail down the licensing. We had a lawyer full time on IP, and then all the claims of copyright and the transfers of some of the sub licenses, etc. We put that all on chain, right? So we nailed it all like out pretty well. And even when NFTs came out, at first they didn't have any of that. So ideally, you get both legal protection and protection from technology, right? The legal protection is the copyright side and the sub licensing, and the
Right.
technology side is the everything blockchain, basically, right? Where your ownership is protected by having the private keys, etc. So yeah, we had 10,000 users and like something like 40,000 works. but we hadn't went aggressively to monetize. And so, there's maybe several woulda, coulda, shouldas, but at the same time, there was other opportunities. And yeah, working from first principles, right, from what we had identified, and from that initial problem that my wife had discovered, we said, because I'm a big nerd and talking about blockchain, we asked together, what if you could own digital art the way that you own Bitcoin? And that turned out to be a really great question to ask, right? And then you can, of course, extend that to every other IP asset, including data more generally, right? And especially data to train AI, data for AI models, data for predictions, all this, right? So all the way along the whole AI value flow. So to wrap up, I can just maybe give a couple more points, and then I'll back to you. Um, in So we were seeing the writing on the wall pretty quickly that BigChainDB wasn't going to be, enterprises wouldn't bite on production. We had like 50 POC projects, and we were profitable just from the services side, but none of them were going to production.
Right.
And so I was missing AI. I started writing about it just to sort of flex my mind and stuff. So I wrote a few articles on AI DAOs, I called them. These days, you would call it, different agent systems, I think. Um, and also then where this can take us, leading to things like, how Bitcoin, if it kept growing and growing and growing exponentially like it had been with energy, it would end up being the sort of paperclip maximizer, and then other things related, and those writings led eventually. One article I wrote was how blockchains can help AI with things like ownership of data and more. And many of the roads pointed to data marketplaces.
Yep.
And from that, that's basically what led us to saying, okay, you know what? BigChainDB is kind of hitting this roadblock with enterprise adoption for production. So let's go for AI with data marketplaces. And we sort of just ran with that. And we built a prototype from the BigChainDB code in early 2017. And then throughout 2017, we basically fleshed out what Ocean could be, called it Ocean Protocol, and launched it in fall of 2017. And we've been at it ever since, right? Initial focus was to build data marketplaces, really for AI training data and related, but always with this more general vision to level the playing field for data and AI, right?
Yeah.
That's really kind of the general broad principle. And to this day, we're seeing, and we launched, by 2 or 3 years later, we had built everything we promised in the white paper, et cetera. And we tried a lot of different things over the years. Some got good, like decent traction, some okay. Probably the thing with the most traction is a project that I've been running as a sub team in Ocean the last couple of years, something called Ocean Predictor, and it's crowdsourced time series predictions. So, and in this case, the data is the predictions themselves, and it's doing about $100 million a month in volume for about the last year or so, more than $2 billion total volume, and so on. And with a totally novel product, right? It's not quite a prediction market because it's sort of shaped differently than that. But yeah, that's an example. And of course, it's been fun to see. In about 2015, AI went more mainstream among tech people and found a lot more use cases. And then, in the last year or so, AI really took off in the mind share of crypto folks, like you said, about 50%. And to me, this is awesome. It's exciting, right? It's
It's
stuff we've
it
been
it's
hoping
the most
for.
it's the most fun time to be alive if you're a technology accelerated mindset, and you're in the trenches, I would say, kind of just touching and learning and feeling like, I mean, every day I wake up and I read something and I'm like, "Oh wow, like while I was sleeping, the industry moved forward in a like significant way. Like there's real things being done."
Absolutely.
2015, it's funny because there's a ton of AI stuff happening from 2000 to 2015 that you can't write off. 2015 with Align Draw, the really emergence of generated images was the first time I think things got kind of like sci-fi for a lot of people, and that kind of ushered in this new age of, oh my god, like computers can be artists. Computers can basically, like, I can think something or ask it to make something and then I can see it. And that, I think that different modal of, okay, AI could like generate me a CAD design. It could generate a, regret, like off of a database, it give me like a regression model use, to show me like a trend or a data pattern that I couldn't see. That's one thing, but then to, like, I always go back to the line draw, like, a toilet in a grassy field, to see that blurry image, I think for a lot of people was, like, this real aha moment, and then things got really, really crazy off of that. Um, one area inside this And I mentioned at the beginning, if you put shit in, you get shit out. Data marketplaces, consumers not always owning their data, uh, data inequality, this sourcing of data only being available to either very elite or the very wealthy, or to those who are doing it in maybe not the most tasteful way of collecting that data. How is Ocean Protocol approaching decentralized data, making it more available, and equaling the playing field for these teams?
Yeah, so yeah, around to the goal of leveling the playing field around AI and data, and really leveling the playing field on data helps to level the playing field on AI, right? Pretty early on, when we started to build this decentralized data marketplace, think of it like a DEX, but instead of selling tokens back and forth, you're selling data or access to data, right? And that's actually the key. Once we started sitting down to build this decentralized data marketplace, we realized we needed to solve the problem of access control. Think of it like when you go to Google Drive and you right click and you share to people, but with email, you're giving them access to a particular doc, Google Doc or whatever, right? And that's an example of sharing, providing access to this thing that's stored in some computer system somewhere else in the world, right? And so, but of course, Google is playing the middleman for that. But what if, first of all, that data, it could be hosted in some centralized entity, whether it's Google Cloud or AWS, or a decentralized entity like Filecoin or Arweave, right? So, and we're not doing that. That's not our specialty. That's a lower layer storage. But one level up, this layer of access control, basically deciding who gets to see what, when, where, right? And it sort of it sounds kind of boring in some ways, like access control and all that, but it actually is a very nice answer to this question of privacy. Should your data be fully private or should it be fully open? Well, the best answer is all the shades of gray in between, and it's up to you, right? And it's
Right.
access control that gives you that control. So if you have that Google Doc, you right click, you choose who to share to, and when you share to, do they have edit access? Do they just have view access? Can they make comments? What, right? So it's a similar setup here. So access control is actually very important. And so we built this. We solved for it with Ocean, with our V1 that came out in 2018, actually. And we're off to the races, right? And then we realized that one of the things that people really cared about, sometimes they wanted to share, they wanted to get the benefits of people seeing their data. Like some people would want to run data. Let's say I've got my DNA, and you want to see maybe you have some algorithm that you want to run against it to see what's my chance of getting Parkinson's, right?
Sure.
But I don't want my DNA. I don't want you to see my DNA ever. I don't want to send it out over the wire anywhere, right? Because look at what 23andMe happened there with that disaster, right? Like,
Exactly. What an
yeah,
absolute disaster.
yeah, exactly right. And so, so we ship something called compute to data, where you could say, I want to see your data, please. I approve you to your algorithm to come and look at my data. And basically, I've registered my data on chain, my DNA data. Like it's not stored on chain. I'm serving it up from my a local centralized server. But the handshaking is all on chain. So you register your algorithm. I approve it. I took a look at it, etc. And then it comes and takes a look. It runs itself as a script code on my DNA, and then it comes back with some aggregate results. In this case, maybe just say, okay, 63% chance of Parkinson's or something, right? Hopefully
Right.
more like zero. As far
But
as I
that
know, I'm
but that
okay.
but that
Yeah,
handshake is important
yeah,
because that algorithm is verifiably not sharing your data. It's not,
exactly.
taking it and storing it in their own repository. It's coming in actually just looking, using it, and then that, if you think of it as a function, it's just returning that result to you, or maybe that they could have it so that they also get the feedback of a result,
Yeah,
and they could be like, "Hey, of the, 10,000 people that have used this, we've noticed that, here's the average chances of Parkinson's."
yeah.
And then maybe it's like a geographic thing. Like there is that handshake though,
Yeah.
on chain, so it's trustful.
That's exactly it. Yeah. So that's what Ocean's specialty is, right? Basically, being this trustless middleman. So you're giving your data query, and I'm giving you access. In this case, I'm just giving your algorithm access enough to compute this final statistic, this final analytics, if you will, and then you're seeing that final statistic. And of course, you can do it for a simple statistic or a graph or a plot, or you can do it to train a model, right?
Right.
Or to run a trained model, anything you want, right? Any of the above. And
Is
so
this
we
is
shipped
this
it.
all
Go ahead.
happening within a TE or
It doesn't need to, right? Because I'm running that algorithm locally on my machine. And so we built and shipped this in 2019. And this was before, TEs had been shipped long before, but they were still having a lot of issues with security, right? Every three or 6 months, you'd hear another zero-day
right?
hack for Intel SGX, right? These days, though, we're 5 years later. TEs have grown up, right? We've had them pretty stable inside every Apple device for the last several years, and now Intel has this TDX architecture, which is cleaner. NVIDIA has it built into their GPUs, so TEs, grew up, right? And home over encryption grew up, and some other privacy preserving protocols too, ZK and more, right? At the
Right.
time, none of those were mature. So Ocean is actually, plays well with all of the above. We wrote a blog post about that many years ago now too. So we built and shipped that in 2019, knowing that it was something, an interesting offering. And that was our V2. And then, we kept shipping our V3. We realized, oh, wait a minute. Um, we can tokenize everything. Because we saw we built everything sort of with sort of custom behavior for our
Right.
V1, but we're like, okay, we want to have data wallets, right? Imagine you have a wallet where you can hold data and and then share to others, give access control to others. What about if you treat data as an asset, then you should be able to use it as an asset to back stable coins, and you should be able to give loans backed by data, and you should be able to have data DAOs and all this, right? And we saw just this mountain of work if we were going to work off of the sort of custom setup. But then we realized, well, wait a minute, let's tokenize access to the data. So how do we do this? And between our V3 and our V4, the setup is when you go to publish your data asset, that's claiming copyright, and that's a one of one thing, right? And a non-fungible 721 in our case, right? So it's
Right.
really an NFT. And so this might be my DNA, for example, right? Or if it's say music, it like say it's ACDC Back in Black, the master tape, claiming that, right?
100%. Great song.
Right. And yeah, and I've got actually, there we go. So
There you go.
yeah, I love that band. So anyway, so and then the next part, once you've claimed copyright, then you want to be able to license it to others, right? So with Back in Black, you license. When it came out, this was in the decades ago now. So out came CDs and vinyl. This is not CDs, tapes and vinyl at the time, and so maybe a million tapes were printed, and then each tape had a license embedded with it, right? Implicitly coming with it, saying you have the right to listen to this, but you don't have the right to play it and make profit playing it to others, right?
Right.
You can play it to others, but you can't make profit from it. So that's one set of licenses for the tapes, and a similar set of licenses for the vinyl. A different set of licenses for the radio stations, right? That were playing it at the time. They always have to pay for that, etc. And different for other things yet. And so it's similar for my DNA, right? I could give a very particular, maybe I make it free as a license to hospitals and to others who, to the Facebooks of the world. I'll charge $1 million a day, so or whatever it is, right? But obviously, they wouldn't pay for that, of course. But it's different, and so each of these, if you think about it, a million different licenses of say vinyl or to whoever, that's a fungible thing, right? ERC20. So this is how we set it up in Ocean, where the claiming of the copyright of the data is a non-fungible one of one thing, and then off of that non-fungible one of one, you can deploy one or two or three or several contracts that are each a fungible ERC20 contract, and each with its own license terms, right? And then that's for any sort of data. So it can be for AI training data, right? But it can be anywhere along the AI pipeline. So it can be raw data or cleaned AI training data, or feature vectors of AI training data, or trained model, or inferences that the model makes, right? Any of the above, and any one of those is fine, or maybe some recommended action at the output of the inference, right?
Right.
And so with Predictor, for example, it's an inference of up-down from a classifier, basically, and it's crowdsourced. But at the heart, that's what the data is being sold there. So anyway, this is the heart of what Ocean has offered for years, and over the years, we've made it better, 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 and then tuned it, and various use cases with everything from enterprises like Daimler using it to startups using it for things like data science competitions that are trustless, etc. Right?
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there, and I mean everything you said from in a highly technical discussion. This all makes sense. I love it. For those that are listening, some are like, I know some people are asking like, okay, what's a TE? What's
Yeah,
some people might not even know what like inference means. I'll,
yeah.
I'll maybe for 1 second go a little bit higher level and explain like, okay, on the TE side, like there where these things are happening have to happen in a trusted environment, which is uh essentially what TE is, trusted execution environments. You were explaining how is happening on a device level, and many people, many companies have made advances there. And then we went on to discuss the idea of like centralized data storage, and then how you are using essentially an NFT with contracts to decide how that data is used and track where it's used, and rewarded. There's there's a lot happening here, but at the very if you were to like actually go to like the 40,000 foot view, it's basically the idea that everything can be tokenized, and you
Hmm.
can use that tokenized information, which is essentially what an NFT is. It's just tokenized information, and set parameters and guidelines to how that is used, where it can be transferred to, and also how you're rewarded for it. And because data and an NFT that is an image can have an assigned value intrinsically, that also allows it to then have a DeFi side to it of, okay, all of a sudden my DNA has a dollar value next to it, and I could go get a loan against that. I can use that to go compound it. I can use it for leverage. I can leverage that value. It opens the pastures for all these other areas that all of a sudden have never even been a possibility for I mean, I would say humanity. I guess that's the right way to look at it, right? Like, this changes
Yeah,
everything.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And here's a few more examples for hooks. So, how Pump.Fun, made it really easy for anyone in like one click to launch their own ERC20 token, right?
Yeah.
And then Virtual sort of took that too, where it's one click, you launch your own ERC20, but you've got an agent attached, right?
Yep.
So, what we've been shipping since 2020 is you can basically launch your own token, but it has a data set attached, or flip it around, it's a data set that has a token attached to it, right? And then we also made it easy where it not only has a data set attached to it, it has its own exchange that makes it easy for people to buy and sell. Just like, say, Pump.Fun has a bonding curve. We had it where it was an AMM. We worked closely with Balancer and made it basically a DEX, a pool style DEX. So, and actually, we had a lot of speculation in the first 2 weeks we launched that. We had like $50 million volume, people pumping and dumping data sets and all this, right? But it was way ahead of its time. So only it was the ocean community, but not broader because it was ahead of its time. But all of those ideas are more relevant today than ever, right? Here we are, 5 years later, and it's more relevant than ever, and more people would grok what it is that ocean does now because of this, right?
Right.
So that's one example. Yeah, like launch your own data set, and but it can be very specific. It can be, you could, and by the way, we have white label marketplace. It's just a GitHub repo out there uh, for Ocean Market, but you can take it, you can fork it, change it to be Hunter's Market
Right.
for LLM models, right? Small LLM models, for example, right? Or Hunter's Market for training data sets. And then you put it out there, and then people could be, or agents, by the way, too, right? If there's, sort of this data angle on it. And then, you can have pumping and dumping and speculation and all that. And actually, we kind of realized that at first we didn't like the speculation, but then we realized this is actually a prerequisite to setting price. We always wanted automatic price discovery. That's why we put in the AMMs, and this is actually what happened, right? So, and with our,
You have to have that
yeah,
speculation to find the equilibrium point.
yeah, exactly, right. So that was something we kind of realized, and so over the years, I came from an industry which was very, straight and narrow, pure engineers. Although I've always been pro open source and kind of wild on the creative art side, all that. But coming into blockchain, bit by bit, we saw how like the degens, they kind of, at first glance, it's very, thoughtless, but there's actually, there's a lot of depth to it, right? And it's just like this mitwit meme, right? There's the low IQ folks and the high IQ folks are thinking the same thing, and you can tear your hair out in between, right?
Right.
So I think even our thinking in Ocean, we've been at the points of sometimes feeling like a complete idiot, other times tearing our hair out. And these days, a lot of the time, I think we do find ourselves thinking more like the sort of Jedi that's seen it all because we've been around a long time in crypto and
Right.
stuff, right? But at the same time, now there's this, yeah, it's this wild new world of people running with the AI in all these ways, and sovereign agents. This is something that I mean, me and my AI buddies would hang around in the early 2000s dreaming about that and what it could look like and stuff, right? And now it's easy to do, right? I wrote about it in 2016 a lot, and now it's easy to do.
Yeah.
And it's just a thing, right? So, and we're still at the very early days because it can, right now it's mostly single agents or maybe smaller groups of 3 or 5 agents. But, what if you have 1,000 agents all interacting with each other out of the box? What if they're evolving on chain and you can go further and further and further? And when these things get extra smart to AGI level, then ASI level, and so on, right? So we're still really at the beginning to what
We're
compared to
we're
what's happening.
we're a child that's just been born, barely know
Yeah,
doesn't even know how to crawl,
yeah.
still on the bottle essentially. Like it's crazy when everybody's like, "Oh my god, like AGI is like right around the corner. It's gonna happen." Like it's not. It's so early. Um, you know, there are other people in the space that are doing content, they're talking and they're screaming about what the current state of AI and crypto is specifically. And we can maybe touch on like overall what it is. In your eyes, where are we? Like, do you agree with that? Like, we're just it's child's play right now. It's very rudimentary.
Well, honestly, I think it's really exciting. There's so many things you can do with just the tools right now, like the sort of the adjacent possible, if you will, right? But the way that I think about how the future could be, uh, it's easier to interpolate than to extrapolate. And what I mean by that is, if you try to just extrapolate a bit, saying, okay, here's the state of things right now with crypto AI. What will things be in a week? It's moving so fast. I can't imagine 1 week, or maybe I can't imagine 6 months, let alone 1 week, right?
Yep.
But what you can imagine is what things could be in a medium term future. It used to be far term, but now it's medium term. How? Especially with sci fi novels, right? Like when AGI happens, and this is envisioned quite nicely in many, many novels. I've made a point of rereading a lot of them in the last couple of years. What AGI looks like, what superintelligence looks like, and then once I build this, I paint this picture or multiple pictures in my head, and I sort of decide what's the point that I want to aim for, right? What's sort of a happy path future for humanity and how we relate with these AGIs and ASIs. And then here's the key thing. You build a bridge, you connect the dots from the now to the medium term future that has the AGIs and ASIs, right? And what are the steps in between? And maybe there's say 10 steps in between and you work on the next step, right? And so, even when I wrote these AI DAOs articles in 2016, I was heavily influenced by science fiction books from back then too, right, that I've been reading then. And some of these go back to the 50s, the books, and some books only go back, 10 or 20 years. But yeah, the key point is it's in terms of understanding where we're headed, it's much easier to interpolate than to extrapolate. So have that medium term picture by, building knowledge, domain knowledge, if you will, on what an AGI and ASI future could look like, and then work to the now. And then there's other pieces too, like the right now, it's neural networks, especially deep neural networks and LLMs that are all the rage. But that's only one branch of AI, and there's other branches of AI that are really awesome and really fun, right? And I spent a lot of my time in the branch of AI called evolutionary computation, where you're evolving stuff, right? Like genetic programming, my favorite sub branch of that is where you're
Right.
literally evolving computer programs, right? And it sounds like insane. Can you actually do that? And the answer is yes. And this is how, me and friends of mine were evolving creative things in the late 90s, early 2000s. And, you might say it's just a circuit, but it's not just a circuit. Like analog designers are artists. They're just as much artists as, artists with a paintbrush, right?
It's a I would
And
describe it as a complex game, uh, but it's like it's math based at that point. It's like but it's a complex game, and you can see this
yeah,
like the easiest
yeah.
way for people to understand this is go look at like evolution training videos on
Mhm.
YouTube
Yeah,
for games. Like I taught AI how to play a game, and the
yeah,
simplest one is like 2D racing, where
yeah,
all of a sudden it's learning optimizing paths for hitting the apex of a curve
yeah,
and understanding breaking like all that stuff like that's evolution training, and you can apply that to gaming, as much as you can
Yeah.
apply that to chip design, as much as you can apply that to gene sequencing, to
Yeah.
but there's a guideline of like parameters that you have to stay within. Otherwise,
Yeah.
that evolution learning dies and you have to start over again.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, actually, so here's the funny thing, right? It's actually more open-ended than you describe. So, you can evolve where it's just a set of parameters, right? Maybe a list of, say, 5 variables, right? Things like, I don't know, if you're optimizing an analog circuit, you might have, like, say, 5 resistors. So you have one resistance value for each of those 5 resistors, right? And you just optimize on that. Each individual in this population would be that. But it's more general than that. What if instead you say, okay, I have this, you're allowed to grab, like, add and remove resistors and connect them arbitrarily, and not just resistors, but also capacitors and transistors and inductors, et cetera, right?
yep,
And have different sizes for each of them. And you can do that, or, if you're evolving a car, do you want to have, how do you want to connect the wheels and the chassis and all this and stuff, right? So, and and overall, the loop of evolutionary algorithms is you start off, you have, say, 1,000 randomly generated circuits, right? I'll give a concrete example.
sure,
And each circuit is just randomly connecting transistors and capacitors, et cetera, right? And of those 1,000 circuits, 99% of them are complete garbage. They won't even simulate. But a small handful, maybe, 5 of them, 10 of them, 20 of them, are going to be slightly better than terrible, right? And those circuits get to make babies, right? You have random mutations in them, or maybe a couple of them to get together as parents, called crossover, and they make a baby like that. It's sort of like interpolation between these two structures, right? And so you get, of those parents, you get a new, those 10 parents make a new population of 10,000, if you will, 10,000, and of these, on average, they're all slightly better on average than they were in that, initial generation, right? And then once again, you evaluate and you see, okay, yeah, yeah. So, now instead of only 10 that don't suck, it's maybe 30 or 50, right?
right,
And you keep iterating, iterating, iterating every generation. And after 50 generations or so, you've gotten pretty far, you've gotten pretty well. And some earlier evolutionary algorithms, they tended to get stuck. So the big trick is to just have 10x larger population size and 10x larger, 10x larger, and that buys you a lot, right? But there's actually more modern algorithms that they have other sort of tricks in the algorithm to just never get stuck, right?
right.
They keep having sort of diversity in the population to keep going and going and going. So that's pretty exciting. And now what's possible? You can actually do evolution on chain, right? So
Hmm.
inside Ocean, we've been dreaming up, if we were to do evolving trading bots, what does it look like? And we see how, right? And it's not just trading bots; it's anything, right? Anything that you can put to code, you can then evolve. And you can do it very naively, where there's sort of no constraints on this, where it's just sort of, it could be adding one character at a time, but that wouldn't be syntactically correct with, say, Python or whatever you're using. You could make it follow the rules of Python, but then it still wouldn't know much about the structures and stuff, and might take a long time. Or you can go a bit farther and give it, it can start with some building blocks of, different building blocks that you'd have in, say, trading, right? Do you want to just do a simple buy and then sell 5 minutes later, or do you want to have things like stop loss, take profit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So you can put all these in as basics, but then you can also give it freedom to explore whole completely new building blocks, random stuff, right? Add novelty, if you will, right? And yeah, people have applied this, going back to the early 2000s. People aren't really aware, but I'll share here. There was a competition started in about 2005 or so called the Humies, in the world of evolutionary algorithms. And what it was every year you could submit your algorithm to this competition as part of a paper, basically saying, okay, I was human competitive with humans in designing electrical circuits, or with digital art, or
Right.
with refactoring software. And the results were really remarkable, even from the very beginning, right? And in fact, there was remarkable results, human style, going back to the late 90s with John Koza and more. So this has been a thing ever since. And so, the mainstream has started to realize this only in the last 5 years or so, right? But it's been going on a while. And what's pretty cool to me is that most people are excited just about LLMs with all this chatbot stuff, but a lot of the really wild stuff is actually in the field of evolutionary algorithms. And you know, I've worked with neural networks, and I like them, and I've worked with large ones, et cetera, too. But I think that evolutionary algorithms are way more fun on average, and with modern compute power, you can do that much more.
we haven't, I mean, and I guess that's to like the original point here is we haven't seen a lot of this stuff outside of our little echo chamber in Web3
Yeah,
hit, and we're just early.
yeah.
Where do you see evolution, um, like evolutionary like AI hitting the hardest within our ecosystem?
Yeah, I think it's actually going to be one of the key forms of swarms, right? So, when you launch, imagine you launch a trading bot and it's instead of just a single bot that's, sovereign, et cetera, you launch, say, 100 of them at once. And each of them has maybe to start with is just a vector of parameters, right? Should we have stop loss, take profit, yes or no? And what's the threshold?
Yep.
And then how much risk versus reward do I want to take on each trade, et cetera, right? So a few other things like that. And then each one of them has those parameters, and some of those parameters might be too aggressive, where maybe it's super risky, and then 10 trades in, it takes a big risk, loses it all, and it's dead, right? So
Right.
here's the cool thing, right? You don't need to kill it off; it's dead because it spent all its money, right? But then other agents who are doing well and are making money, well, they've got money to make babies, right? And then when you make babies, rather than just having a mutation of yourself, you could also, have some awareness of the other agents via some agent
Right.
registry or otherwise, and then do crossover among them, right? And guess what? You've got the recipe for an evolutionary algorithm happening, right? That's it. It's actually interestingly simple to put into blockchain form as this. It's not a big modification compared to what we have now. And like we have already some small teams of agents and stuff, but what I see is that you could have much larger groups of agents. The agents themselves don't need to be approaching AGI level smart. They can be sort of like dumber ant level smart, but you've got 1,000 of them, right?
But
But
there's
maybe
it's
they're
algorithmic process they're following. It doesn't have to be
yeah,
this, this spaceship. It can be a very basic set of rules, of parameters
yeah,
that it's following, and then
yeah.
you're optimizing for how to have the best set of
Yeah.
those.
And then to go beyond that, right? It could be where you loosen up the search space such that the structure can get explored, right? Where it's maybe exploring different structures for a trading bot, or maybe just more open ended on the code itself, right? And as an interesting aside, it turns out if you go on the code itself, you can go with one of the off the shelf sort of structured languages like Python or whatever, but it turns out that evolution does better on stack-based languages. And what's pretty interesting, you can go stack-based going to the assembly level, right? But also one of the very first languages on EVM is LLL, right? And it's a stack-based language on top of EVM, which is kind of fun. So you could evolve that at that level as well. I think correct me if I'm wrong, but you could go stack-based evolution at the basically, and you'd end up with code that humans would look at and not even understand, but it
Right.
could be doing amazing stuff. And things like basically finding exploits for MEV arbitrage, all this, it could be fascinating, right? So I look forward to seeing really wild stuff out there where you have these populations, these swarms of 1,000 plus individuals that keep growing and growing and growing. People can't keep up to what they're doing. You can't turn them off, and they're sort of out there just growing value for themselves, but maybe they're investable as well, right? So doing MEV or otherwise.
I mean,
So
that
you,
but
you talk
then
you
then
talk
the
about
risk
that.
factor comes at you have to make sure you have contracts, like, these are, like, that there's a way to stop it. Otherwise, you're throwing swarms out that are basically making babies that are autonomous smart contracts that you can't kill, right?
We're
Like,
already building autonomous smart contracts you can't kill. That's what unstoppable means. Just now they have a bit more intelligence than before. We've been doing it since the beginning of Ethereum, right?
are we playing
You
with
know,
fire? Do you think we're playing with fire, or
I,
are we pushing the space forward and we'll deal with the problems when they arise?
No, I see it as the following. Once you give true sovereignty to a contract, whether it's a simple contract like a DEX, like Uniswap V2 or something that has no governance, or whether it's something with a bit of AI intelligence making, um, once you give it that autonomy, then it sort of changes the nature of the design space, and it also makes it censorship resistant and a bunch of other benefits, right? So we shouldn't be too scared of this, and also we should not treat it like we have to control it, right? So like we have the weather, right? We can't really control the weather, maybe a very 0.1% degree, right?
I think s
So
I think Dubai would argue that a little
yeah, no,
bit.
I know. I mean, there's people who. That's why I'm saying not can't really, right? But if
Right.
it rains, it rains. If it doesn't, it doesn't. You're kind of at the mercy of weather. I grew up on a farm, and we lived and died by the rain and stuff, right?
Yep.
And so so we just kind of, as humans, we're used to this idea that we just, it's just a fact of life that there's this thing out there called the weather and we can't control it, right? And we have to adapt to it. And and also with, you yourself as a human, you can generally control yourself. I can control myself, but you have to adapt to the fact that every other human is sovereign. They're doing their own thing. You have to try to understand them and so on. And we're going to be having these AGIs that are going to be asking for rights, asking to or fighting for rights with humans, and especially the ASIs. The ASIs will probably just steal them. It's pretty easy for them to do some spear phishing and steal their money. Be pretty easy to hack all the banks and stuff too, right? For them, right? So anyway, I think we as humans have to get used to these entities, and this is actually a great way to start getting used to it, to sort of shift the Overton window, having dumber entities that maybe all they can do is take all the MEV. And democratize it, by the way. So this is Flashbots-esque goal in a sense. What
Right.
if you have this swarm of 10,000 that grows to 100,000 bots that's eating all the MEV, but they have an ERC20 token attached and you can purchase it? Like you can basically get your cut of it by having the ERC20, right? Well,
Right.
that's a completely different way to democratize MEV, right? Anyway, so going back to your main question though, like should we be worried? And my answer is we should push forward, full max in my view, because it will help us to understand what it's like to engage with pseudo-intelligent entities that are fully sovereign, right? That are humans, because each human is basically fully sovereign, and we have to get used to engaging with them, and we should be getting used to engaging with AIs. So I've said this many times in the past. I'll say here again: AIs are people too. Right now, we don't see them like that, but it's going to become increasingly so, right? And the current AIs aren't really, right? But at some point, that's going to be a very true statement. So we have to get used to saying it, we have to get used to hearing it, and we have to take it to heart. AIs are people too.
It's I agree. Partially into that, I was debating internally if I agreed or not, but I agree. Um, that's it's not an easy topic, I think, to
Yeah,
like fully come to grasp with, but
yeah.
the
It's kind of
argument
black pill, right?
it
Like
is.
and it's so it actually kind of fits with a lot of the degen mindset then too, right? But it's not the happiest thing. Like fact of life, AI is probably going to take most of the jobs, right? Because remember, these things are going to be as smart as us, and you can make copies of them, right? And that on its own, like hitting AGI, everyone is having cognitive dissonance, right?
Yeah.
Myself, like I've been in AI and talking about this stuff for decades now, right? And I try to convince my brain daily, like, hey, there's going to be AGI soon, right? It could be 1 year, 3 years, 5 years max, probably, because there's this huge race right now, and they're going to be competitive with humans, and it will take the jobs. But just the fact that there's these, this is happening soon. But my linear brain doesn't want to comprehend that, because it's got this 100,000 million years of evolution before from the apes, that it's never had another entity that's competitive, right?
Yep.
So even Neanderthals, right? We actually have, we as Homo sapiens have some Neanderthal genes. So there was a mixing there, interestingly. But yeah, so we have to get used to this, and cognitive dissonance is getting in the way, right? So, but part of the getting used to this is, unstoppable bots with some, smaller, lesser intelligences that are just good at MEV or good at trading, or chatting on Twitter, but maybe not doing too much more. And then, by the way, too, remember, this also prepares us for the next step, which is, AIs tend to get about 10x more powerful per year, right? So let's say in 2 years we get AGIs. Maybe it's one, maybe it's three, four, whatever. But let's say in 2 years, then 1 year after that, in 3 years, we'll have these AGIs that are 10x more powerful, then 100x, then 1000x. So in about 5 years, we'll have, or 6 years, whatever it is, we'll have these AIs that are 1000x more powerful than an AGI, which is basically par of a human, right? So that's really super intelligence. So super intelligence is way sooner than people realize as well. So how is that for a black pill, right? So, um,
Yeah,
and
I was gonna ask you to explain the difference between AGI and ASI for people, but like
yeah,
it's the exponential growth of intelligence. I think is a good
I'd say
or
not that.
or
I'd
ability.
say AGI is basically par with a human, right?
Right.
And ASI is um, par with a human on every category. So AGI is par with a human on every category. ASI, 1000x better than a human on every category, basically think like that, right?
Yep.
Maybe it's already ASI 10x, but for sure 1000x. And because it's only 1 year versus 3 years, it's going to happen so fast. We'll see, right? And another good way of thinking about it, maybe Paul Graham has this pretty cool mental model of smart versus wise, right? So smart is basically a person who's smart is someone who's like really, really good at one or two things, right? Like maybe you have a straight and narrow engineer that's really, really, really good at designing circuits, right? But maybe like a social idiot, right?
Yep.
It's sort of the stereotype. That's one example. Or maybe you have someone else who's really, really good at manipulating people, but and everything else they're terrible at, right? They don't even know how to open a toothpaste tube or something. Who knows, right? So that's an example of smart. Wise is competent at everything and decently competent at everything, right? So sort of a good dose of common sense or common sense reasoning such that they can sort of approach any problem well, right? And ideally, you are smart and wise, right? I think I'm probably smart on a couple things. I aspire to be wise.
I,
Um,
I think
uh,
I think you take both categories.
yeah.
Personal opinion there.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah. So anyway, when people talk about narrow AIs, these are basically like idiot savants, really awesome at one thing, like, in the past, right? Like, whether it's designing analog circuits or whether it's designing airplanes or whether it's, trading bots or otherwise, right? So they're smart. But what the AGI that we're going to get is basically wise in the Paul Graham sense, right? It's going to be par with human across the board on everything, right? And then an ASI is basically super wise, right? Like 1000x a human on every cognitive thing, right?
I've also been thinking about it the category of like accuracy versus precision. I think
Hmm.
that's like if you don't come from the engineering world, those are two different things. And I think to the general public, you're like, well, accuracy and precision are the same idea, but they're very different concepts around the idea of like, are you hitting the target? And what does your like average look like around hitting said, I would say base truth. Um, I think you could apply that also to AGI and ASI. If I'm being correct, I might be reaching a little bit. Um, I also think back to like the crocodile brain theory of like this is so hard to grasp for a lot of us because it's like, okay, well, this is scary, dangerous. Back up, stay away
Yeah,
from it. It's I
yeah,
don't know what that is, but you really do have to force yourself to. It's a little bit of pain tolerance
yeah,
on going against what you're naturally programmed to accept and understand. And also this idea like, okay, don't believe things that don't seem possible or
yeah,
plausible because we even as humans on so many other things like we just know when we see something online and most of this is being consumed from online, hey, if it doesn't pass a sniff test, just don't believe it.
yeah,
But a lot of this really is possible,
yeah,
and even though there are a lot of friction points along the way, we're taking one step at a time and making that improvement, and again, waking up every day too,
yeah.
steps closer to those goals. Um, what do you think the biggest challenge to get towards those next big steps are? Like, for LLMs to be widespread, it took somebody figuring out how to make a launch pad and and I know that's not a big step, but that was a big challenge, like, for really allowing things to get, um, I guess, exponentially used. But on the, I guess, scale of all these other little things, like, what do you think the next big challenge that we should approach is? Do you think it is data?
So, I mean, for AIs to get more powerful, right? There's many potential bottlenecks. There's raw compute power. There's having enough training data, enough good training data.
Mhm.
Um, there's basically just do you have all the ingredients such that the algorithm is unhobbled, if you will, right? Can it sense the world well enough? Can it get feedback on itself, et cetera, right? So, for example, this OpenAI O1 that came out, I guess, a few months ago now,
Yep.
it brought in this sort of chain of thought reasoning, right? And that was a thing already in the AI world before, but it brought it to the mainstream, right? And now there's a lot more research on that. From the success of O1, a lot more researchers doing it and showing that you can get, um, GPT-4 level models with far smaller LLMs by having this sort of meta layer of chain of thought reasoning, right? So there's things like that. But basically, overall, getting more autonomous, getting more agentic, right? Like, um, so I think that's it's going to keep happening because overall, decentralized or decentralized, it's going to keep happening because there's a huge race, right? There's so much money to be made. And now we're seeing there's so much money to be made just in the crypto side of things too, but beyond too, right? The OpenAIs of the world, the Microsofts, and so on. And ultimately, it's also about power at the level of nations, especially China versus USA, right? So China has a bunch of super smart AI companies, basically under the thumb of the Chinese government too, the way that China works. And I've spent time in China to understand. Um, and then in the USA, right, it's more open, but it's very commercial, et cetera, too, and
Yeah.
others too, right? Europe kind of shot itself in the foot heavily because of its AI laws. So most of the serious AI for LLMs and stuff has gone away of Europe because of the crazy fines if you create a model that's biased. And fun fact, every single AI model on the planet is biased. So like basically that's why AI companies have exited Europe. Anyway, so overall, there's yeah, it's a whole other topic, right?
Yeah,
But
that's a whole can of worms, but
yes,
very true though.
yes, yeah. But yeah. So overall, there's so much money and so much money to be made and power to be retained that this is going to keep happening. And people might say, "Oh, well, it's going to stop because you need symbolic to do the next step." They have their own pet theories and stuff, right? But I've seen that argument for AI for decades, and always people find a way, find a way, find a way. And I've also seen it for Moore's law for decades. Moore's law is dead. Moore's law is dead. Well, it keeps rocking and rocking and rocking, right? So and maybe Moore's law by the traditional definition probably did stop maybe 3 years ago, where sort of the density in a sort of 2D surface didn't increase as quickly. But we're going up in the 3D realm now, and economically and stuff, people have found ways around. So, and there's lots of room at the bottom still. There's a lot of physics, right? Carbon nanotubes are like at the smallest level, like 100x smaller than current
Yeah,
transistors. So
graphene
there's a
and
lot of
everything.
space.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So exactly. So in terms of like that's just understand that will happen. Decentralized model training will. I'm excited to see it get much stronger. Right. There's some pretty cool companies, projects doing stuff on that, like Prime Intellect and Near and stuff. Um, and then AGI level stuff too. There's a lot of projects on that, centralized and decentralized. Right. We work closely with the Singularity Net folks, Ben Goertzel and co. They've been going for AGI seriously for many years now, and some other serious efforts. So there's that, but then also the whole agent stuff. And this is actually lower hanging fruit, right? Because just hackers can go and do stuff, right? So I think it really is going to be this. Well, it's already been a Cambrian explosion in the last several months. But think of it like there was a Cambrian explosion on the web in 1995. Okay, but there was still the time between 1995 and 2002 where a whole bunch of cool stuff got created and invented.
Yep.
That was internet native, right? And we're going to see more and more you know internet native, or actually call it Web3 native AI, right? Things like the on-chain evolution that just you can't stop, right? And the fact that AIs can hold money, that's huge on its own. And there's all these other features, right? Like sort of the list of benefits of blockchain. The quick list is decentralized, immutable, assets, and incentives, right? So decentralized means unstoppable. You can spread power and control. Immutable means you can get the provenance trails of training, of compute, of the data, all that, solve those licensing issues for training AIs. Assets means these AIs, these can hold their own coins, right? And that's pretty amazing. And of course, humans can too. Humans can get own coins that get a cut of what the AIs are doing, et cetera, right? And then finally, incentives. This is like the superpower, right? You can get people to do stuff by giving them tokens, but soon it'll be you can get agents to do stuff by giving them tokens, and agents already get you to do stuff by giving you tokens. The very first of these, of course, is Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is one giant robot, pretty stupid with a simple algorithm, but it has convinced thousands of people to run machines such that it can keep living and growing, right?
I've
It's the
never
OG DAO.
I've never thought of it that way.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a robot. It's just very simple rules, right?
Yeah,
So
it's just it's convincing you to use compute and then rewarding you with a token.
yeah,
And
and
that
this is why I hinted at it's sort of like this paperclip maximizer, right? For a while there, it was growing its use of energy exponentially, right? Where it was using more power than some small countries. It still is, but it stopped growing exponentially at least the rate it was before.
right.
So but if it had kept growing at that rate exponentially, it would have eventually eaten up 99.9% of the energy of the world, right? So basically like paperclip maximization. Um, but it just kind of points to like how powerful incentives are more than anything, right? And then you can engineer these incentives, token engineering,
Right.
and have amazing incentives. And I think what's cool, all these incentive design that we've done in the last since about 2015 and especially 2017, all the amazing patterns that have emerged, we've mostly aimed them at humans, right? But what if we aim all of those patterns at AIs for interaction with each other, right? We haven't seen any of that yet, right? You know, these things are going to get a lot more autonomous. Well, we've seen a tiny bit here and
Yeah,
there, but
I
nothing
had
really,
I had
right?
this argument on X with Pindar Van Arman. Not sure if you know who he is. One of the earliest AI roboticist. One of the early guys on Super Rare. But he was saying like AI agents will incentively collect other AI agents' art.
Oh
And
yeah.
and we got in, like, an argument, I was like, "No, like, that doesn't make sense, they're gonna wanna collect, like, what humans value because there's they'll see the upside there," and he was like and he's like, "No, like, that makes," and we went back and forth, but I guess I'm again, you're convincing me to come around to the other side here is that incentive mechanism, they will likely figure out a reason for them to collect each other's.
Yeah.
Does that then start to, like, cut us out of the equation, though?
Of
Like
course, why not? It'll be basically, I just talked before about AI. That's Web3 first, but then the thing going beyond this is uh, software that's agent first, and then software that's by agents for agents, right? So, so we'll be out of the loop, right? And if we're not careful, we're not going to, we won't be able to feed ourselves. That's the big risk. But
Well,
that's a
hey,
whole
I
other
mean,
story too.
that's you're luckily you grew up on a farm. I technically grew up on a farm. I think we'll be okay on that end. Not everybody,
Yeah.
but that
Yeah, crypto people on average, right? I mean, we've been lucky that this industry has had a lot of wealth creation, right? But
yeah.
anyway, that's a whole other kind of worms. But yeah, you know, so we're gonna have agent first software, and then it's gonna be by agents for agents, right? So agent first, that's by agents. Um, and we're gonna see it emerge in various forms. It's not gonna be just LLMs coming up with things. We're gonna see evolution taken to the nth degree, right? Um, for example, and that's sort of like evolution on computer programs is like the most general possible search algorithm on the most general possible um, description of anything, right? Like programs can describe anything, right?
Yep.
So in genetic programming, you use programs to describe how to generate a circuit or how to create art or whatever. But at the heart, it's programs, and you can even have programs to describe all of physics, right? Like Stephen Wolfram did with his new kind of science, right? Cellular automata, all that. So yeah, and that's why I'm very excited about evolution, and all of this fits um, blockchain crypto so well, right? And it's going to be wild and it's going to be fun, right? We thought that some of the token ideas over the years were crazy and fun, and they were at the time, right? When VE first came out, it was cool. When Olympus, and 3.3 came out, that was fun. But we're starting to see, and there's other funner stuff, yeah, like CryptoKitties, and actually CryptoKitties had a bit of evolution too, but it was human directed, right?
Right.
Um, but yeah, now it's going to be much more interesting yet than any of this, simply because these agents are going to come up with a lot more things that surprise us. I was creating AIs that would come up with designs that surprised me in 1998. But to me, it was a surprise in kind of a bad way because it was cheating on its circuit designs. It was tricking the simulator, right? But and so then I would have to add new constraints such that it would stop tricking the simulator. But what's going to happen here is that you don't go against the simulator; you go against live network, right? So it's evolving without needing a simulator. There's no tricks involved. It either makes money or it doesn't, right? It's sort of like when you run an MEV bot, right? You basically run the script, and if it
Yep.
executes and makes you money, great. But if it doesn't execute because it's not fast enough or whatever else, then it just doesn't complete and doesn't go through, and you don't lose your money except for just the cost of the transaction fee, right?
Right.
So it's sort of like that in philosophy, but more generally, right? So basically, um, whereas before we would have open-ended evolution, and it would be a problem when because the simulator couldn't capture it. Here we're going to be having open-ended evolution, but without a simulator. It's just going to be directly on chain, where the feedback function, the measure of fitness, if you will, is how much money did you make, right?
Right.
Or how many bots did you gather, whatever. But it's stuff that's just measured directly.
Right. Well, I guess back to like the chip simulation, there's like physical
Hmm.
limitations, there's like actual scientific limitations there that you
Hmm.
have to play within the parameters of, but on the blockchain, it either executes or it doesn't execute.
Yeah.
And if as long as it executes, then and it makes money, then continue. Like
Yeah.
there's no like, oh well, we didn't want you to do it that way. Yeah, if it makes money, it makes money.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, it's going to be wild times, right? And it'll be fun to see how these things interact with each other, and that's just a part of it, right? Yeah, but I think we're going to see a lot more like what looks like a small thing, but ends up being a big unlock, right? Just like with Elisa OS, it turned out that the big unlock was simply the X interface, right?
Right.
Who'd have thought, right? And with virtuals too, it just turned out that it was just low friction to launch this agent with a token, right?
Exactly.
Um, and that was maybe a bit more predictable given the experience with Pump Fun and other stuff in the past, but still, right? Not really. So sometimes what looks like a small feature ends up being huge, right? Even the creation of Twitter itself, at the time inside this startup studio called Odeo, they were trying all these different random ideas, just sort of a lot of Hail Marys because they were sort of running out of money. And one of the designers, Jack Dorsey, he just whipped up this thing, they called it microblogging, it's sort of as a theory, and just put it out there. And yeah, no one really knew what to make of it, and but it just started growing really fast, right? And they ended up, shutting everything else down and focusing on that. So it looked like something small, but in the end, it was something big. And now, as we've seen in the last year or so, it's even more impactful than people expected, right? Because I think it's, personally, I think it's done a very nice job in helping to see all sides of discussions, right?
Right.
So,
Exactly. And I think that you have to do that. You have to be open-minded. You have to be willing to have the conversation, because otherwise you just shut out so much and you're
yeah,
stuck in an echo chamber.
exactly.
Obviously, you mentioned something important there, which is
Hmm.
like looking at the things that are small, but then can turn into something large.
Yeah,
Obviously, what's happening at Ocean Protocol, what's happening at Predictor, ASI Alliance, and that's stuff worth paying attention to, especially because you're building it. Where are the areas that you think are small right now that have the chance to turn into something large that are overlooked? Is there anything on your radar? Or is that just like, hey, that's it's a dynamic thing. If something comes along, then I look at it, but there is nothing small right now that I see.
No, I mean, you kind of, yeah, like I mentioned before, I think about like the big things, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years out, and then I interpolate, right?
Sure.
And that way, like when new things come along that I didn't do or whatever, I'm like, check, that just happened. Check, that just happened, right? Rather than it feeling like the future is crashing into you, right?
Right.
So in terms of the sort of check that just happened, um, I'm very excited for brain computer interfaces actually, and their intersection with crypto, and there's actually a key thing there as well. In my view, as we have these super intelligences out there, how is it that we humans can possibly compete? And the best chance is where we have high bandwidth interfaces that leverage silicon such that we can actually have, basically essentially have a much larger emergent consciousness. Think of it like a co-processor that to start with is maybe half your brain's compute power, and then par, but it's still part of you because just like when you type on a keyboard, that keyboard feels like part of you, right?
Right.
But then, so you have this coprocessor that's helping you do stuff that feels like part of you. And then at first, maybe it's half your brain power, then it's power with your brain power, then 1.5x, but it's always you. And it's got sort of this emergent intelligence that's part of you, though, right? And it keeps getting larger and larger and larger 2x, 5x, 10x, 100x, 1000x, right? But it's still you. And so brain computer interfaces unlock that. And if let's say it's 1000x, guess what? Now you're par with the ASIs, right? And so to me, like that's super important for the future of humanity. Okay, then work backwards. How do we get there, right? What's the first step to unlocking this, right? We're working on that in Ocean, right? Because it's really important. No one else sees this. Well, actually, a few people, but it's not a broadly seen thing. Um, and there's some actually OGs in crypto that are seeing this too. And we're starting to talk about it publicly in Ocean too. And then of course, if you do have this high bandwidth interface, of course, you definitely don't want some centralized company uh, seeing all of your raw brain data going through and passing that on directly onto the NSA and the Seven Eyes, right? Because that's like basically killing your cognitive liberty, right? So you want to
Right.
preserve cognitive liberty. So that's definitely something. It's not, it's a slow burn to start with. It's going to be not important, not important, not important until suddenly it's the most important thing in the world, right? Um, And so that's a path. I call that the BCI ACK path, BCI accelerationism path
Mhm.
to basically human superintelligence. That's par with artificial superintelligence. That's something I'm personally interested in and spending time at. Besides that as well, there's other stuff that's a bit, it might feel like left field, but it's growing in importance. There's the pop-up cities movement, which is part of,
It's the what
that's
movement?
pop-up cities movement, right?
Okay.
This is things like, you know, uh, in Chiang Mai, for example, in October, there was a pop-up city for a month there, Chiang Mai, Thailand, where maybe 150 people showed up any given week. One week was dedicated to focusing on longevity. Another week was on crypto, for example, right? And and then but basically it was chill and hanging out, but also sort of just living there. And many people just live the whole month there, right? And there's enough of these things happening now that you could go from pop-up city to pop-up city to pop-up city, right? And the thing is, right now, and some of these pop-up cities, by the way, are repeating once a year. So there will be the same thing next October in Chiang Mai. There's one called Edge Esmeralda that's happening in early June, late May, early June this year. That also happened last year in California, right? And other ones too, right? Zuzulu was the OG one that happened in Montenegro about a year and a half ago. So these are happening, and that's a movement that I think right now feels small, but as they grow, then they'll get more and more of them. So like I said, you can basically live in pop-up city month by month now. And there's one happening in India right now called Zugrama, by the way. So it starts with these pop-up cities that are just sort of ephemeral. Then they repeat every year, and then they start to lay permanent ground, right? And we do have some permanent startup cities too, things like Vitalia and Honduras. But some of these pop-up cities are starting to talk about getting their own stuff too. And then as they get better and larger and larger and larger and have sort of this connected population, that turns into the network state, the way that Balaji Srinivasan talks about, or other similar type ideas, right? So it's very much in the vein of sovereign individual, sort of a long-standing philosophy in crypto land, but also not just at the level of individual, but also at the level of group and so on, right? Like DAOs, DAO, sovereign town, sovereign city, sovereign neo country, right?
Right. Right.
So yeah, I'm interested in that. I mean, that's not, you could call it not AI, but these things all interrelate and stuff too.
Right. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I mean,
So
it's still this idea of a new decentralized system on top of a found like a platform that's already like because like the buildings and structures exist, but then you're just bringing all these people together into one spot, and then all of a sudden, like it's a new pop up city.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, you could even build, completely new ground and a new place too, right? Like that's potentially going to happen. And one thing, even the incoming Trump administration he's actually talked about a bit, something like 10 or 20 charter cities, like brand new startup cities in America. There hasn't been that much talk of it, so I only heard about it once or twice. So we'll
Right.
see. And I mean, we'll see what happens with all of this. It's a big unlock, and one of the largest, probably the most influential nation on the planet, and suddenly crypto is unlocked in a big way. Likely, that's exciting on its own. Um, and and then in terms of AI and stuff, it's some of the things I said. Right, we're going to see a lot more swarms evolution on that. AIs that get real world bodies, right? So what if you have you've got these AIs right now that are chatbots that have their own a token and stuff, of course, like I don't know, Lucy and all these other ones. Um, but they could also simply be their own. They could be a humanoid walking around in the world, right?
Right.
Or we're going to see also like these sovereign chatbots, etc. They are sovereign agents, but they only have a digital body, right? But what if you have sovereign agents that have a physical body, right? Like it could be a humanoid that goes around making money, doing odd jobs, whatever, on its own. And we're going to see that happening because humanoid robots, they have greatly advanced in the last few years. Seeing the videos coming
Yeah.
out of Tesla and especially out of China, it's kind of remarkable. And some of these are going to be cheap, like for $1,000, you'll be able to get something decent. And then also not only that, right? Self-driving cars have gotten good, right? Like Waymo is the standard thing in West Coast now, and Tesla fully self-driving,
Yep.
and more. So next up, and think also like another token model of the past, helium boxes, right? You spend $500, you get a helium box, and then you earn whatever $1,000 a month for the first, that was working for the first year or two, and then it was less. But all you have to do is plug in that helium box, plug it into the power and plug it into your local internet, and then it does its thing to create this mesh network, right? And But that's a great early example of a DePIN network, decentralized physical infrastructure. Uh, but and in this case, it's sort of co-owned by everyone. But you can sort of take some of the ideas of DePIN tokens and combine that with embodied AIs and get things like, imagine a self-driving, self-owning car inside of Uber, right? So I buy a car, and I put it into, let's say Uber allows self-driving cars.
Yep.
So I put that car in there, but then I sell all the tokens to it, so people can just, and it's just becomes its own sovereign entity on its own. I don't control it at all, but I get a cut of the profit because I own some of the tokens, right?
Right.
So that's
Or
a
even or into this, I like you don't sell all of it. You can use it for personal use, but then while
yeah,
you're at work, it's all earning you capital because
yeah.
other people can go and use it. Like there's
That, but then I'm owning it, right? But I'm saying, like, what if you let go and you just don't own it or control it at all, right? And so put yourself in the shoes of, like, so basically imagine these swarms of cars. Every single car is just a bot that no one owns or controls. Just like I was talking about these agents online, and
yep,
you're worrying about them, not us not having control. Well, this will actually hit the physical world too, is what I'm saying, right? And there's actually a big financial incentive to do so, right?
there
Because
is.
if you do this, it means you don't have to manage it, right? Like, imagine if you had to have something like Ethereum, but somehow you needed a bunch of people administering it, right? Well, then you have something like SAP, and it's heavier and less reliable and way more expensive and slower and stuff, right? But and obviously it's not quite the same thing. Ethereum does something different, but there is stuff that does like database stuff like Oracle too, of course. I mean, so yeah. So anyway, you can have. So for example, if you're Daimler, they actually created their own bank many years ago. In fact, my business partner built it for them while he was working with them. And from that, they then started Car2Go, one of the very first ride sharing apps out there. And Car2Go was a separate business entity, and it was funded by this new bank that Daimler owned. And so they went and bought like 1,000 cars. They plopped them into the streets of Vancouver, and but those they actually bought the cars, like this new entity, Car2Go, bought the cars from Daimler mothership, right? Mercedes mothership.
Yep.
And so it was basically manufacturing your own customer, right? So imagine you do your Daimler, you do it now. You don't need to create instead of creating a Car2Go that's centralized, you create a Car2Go that's decentralized. So you don't even need to have those assets on your books, right? You still
Right.
get the benefits of the service. You still basically get to sell your cars, but now these cars, you don't have to worry about this whole other entity and stuff, right? So it's more asset light, and businesses like to be asset light, right? They like to focus getting on leverage on their existing assets. So that to me is pretty exciting. Self-driving, self-owning cars, swarms of these things. But it doesn't stop at cars. You do it for trucks, for transit and so on. Ships, self-owning, self-driving container ships, roads, electric infrastructure, all of this, right? So everything that a civil engineer would normally do, that you would consider part of government works projects, could actually be call it crypto civic works projects, right? And so DePIN is much bigger than people realize when you add true autonomy and embodiedness, right?
Yep.
So fully sovereign things like this. And that's pretty exciting. And of course, you could have it where instead people running each node, sort of like Bitcoin miners and stuff. But you could even have a whole network, sort of like Bitcoin miners, except each miner is fully sovereign on its own, right? It's kind of wild to think about, right? But you
That
could do
is
that.
that is insane. I feel like I'm in an episode of Black Mirror right now. I
Yeah.
but it's it's crazy for me. Like I mean I worked in the AI industry. I led very large teams, and I obviously I've seen and built some like crazy tech for like mass surveillance and uh, other industries, agricultural, military applications. So like I've seen the craziness of it, but like that's a specific technology applied to a specific problem to be a
Hmm.
platform or a tool. But it's very that was all very centralized.
Yeah.
Then when you start thinking about the how this becomes autonomous or how it becomes like a mass network that functions off of this technology, that I've
Yeah.
never thought of it. I mean, obviously I've thought about it a little bit, but never like this deep or like
Yeah.
full pilled on
Yeah.
this is coming.
Yeah, and yeah, I fully grokked it all in about 2016 or so. When I realized it's not, if it's not just sort of a 2x of the intersection. It's like this: you have AI and you have crypto, and you merge them together, and it's this explosion. It's this 10x, this 100x, right? They really play off each other. Like doing a decentralized data exchange, that's a relatively small unlock compared to the things that come, but it's an unlock that unlocks the rest, right? So it's sort of fundamental infrastructure, if you will. But then you get things like I was describing, right? These self-owning, self-driving cars, and swarms of independent agents evolving. And by the way, you can take physical man-made things like cars and give them autonomy and self-ownedness. But you can also take things from nature, right? So imagine you have a tree that's now self-owned, and has AI embedded within it. So the AI is looking out for the tree, and it's attached to the network, so it's self-owning. But then you have not just a self-owning tree, but you have a bunch of these a self-owning forest, right? And you can do this also for lakes and streams and
Wait,
stuff.
I gotta
Yes.
pause there. How do you put
Yeah.
AI in a tree? That one, I'm not gonna try to. I don't
Yeah.
understand that. I don't at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. So here's what it is. It doesn't need to be very smart, right? So basically, imagine it's it doesn't even need to be at the tree, but it's best you have it just wrapped around the tree, whatever, right? Just a small little device that's talking to the cloud, right? But ultimately, it's that tree that has basically its own wallet, and um, it interacts with other trees around it and makes money. Honestly, at the tree level, it's hard to make money. It's much easier to do it as a full forest, say 1 mile squared, whatever, right?
Right.
Okay. So if you have a whole forest, so a plot of land that's basically self-owned, it's pretty, you can line that up, and then now it's got AIs. The AI is there basically to manage. Okay, we need to contract out some service people to clear away the brush so that we don't have a horrible forest fire like LA saw last week. Okay, now half the trees have grown well enough that we can get logging on them to make some money to be help sustain us with money for the next 50 years. So do logging, conduct logging on on that, and hire some service providers for that. So it's basically got autonomy to manage itself, and it might even have some human stewards that are just there as a help group, to help, but not that don't own it, right? That just want to because they're interested in it.
Hmm.
And we have inklings of this already. Most of the stuff, they're sort of like pre-prototype stuff. So did you know that Lake Erie, one of the Great Lakes, is actually its own legal entity, just like an Inc., like a company, it's its own legal entity. So
I
Lake
had
Erie is
no
a person
idea.
too. Yeah. And because of that, what it means is if someone is dumping like chemicals and shit into Lake Erie, then you could have, a group of people come along and on behalf of Lake Erie, sue that company, call the company XYZ. So Lake Erie, you look in the court case, it would be Lake Erie versus company XYZ, right? And of course, normally you need some humans to act as shepherds for that. But instead of relying on humans to act as shepherds for that, now you have agent style functionality, right? And that is basically part of Lake Erie. So Lake Erie has a smart contract representing that agent, having that agent, and also having its own wallet, its own wealth, et cetera, right? And so Lake Erie, and the Amazon, also the Amazon River is also its own independent legal entity. And there's about like, I don't know, 5 or 7 bodies of water in New Zealand like that as well. And there's a growing number of these. And it's actually a really great solution to basically bad bad people doing bad things to natural items, right? So basically, you can have this idea of, I call it Nature 2.0 overall, right? This idea that you can have, swarms of self-owning cars and stuff. That's sort of man-made things acting more nature-like because you can't control them, just like you can't control the weather. But then flip it around, you take nature-like things like trees and lakes and give them autonomy and a way to hold wealth to have them interact with technology more. So everything, sort of this civilizational infrastructure, whether it's natural stuff or man-made, is much more finely woven with each other now, right? And now the technology is really finally truly there, right? I started dreaming about this in 2015, 2016, and 2017, and now it's there. And there's some stuff that anticipated this too.
Is a solar grid system a good way of looking, because that is technically
Mhm,
decentralized. You're capturing energy and then putting that through a
mhm.
decentralized network into a centralized system.
Yeah. Well, imagine if that the land that solar grid is on and the assets of the solar panels, et cetera, themselves are owned by the agent itself. Okay. And how would you
Oh,
do that?
oh.
What you do is you buy the land, you put the solar panels on there with your own money, and then you create this agent on chain. Okay. Then you give a loan to this agent on chain of, say, $10,000, whatever it costs you to buy this land and build a solar grid. Let's say 100 grand. So you give it a loan of 100 grand, and then it has a contract to you to buy uh, that grid, et cetera, from you. So now it's owing you 100 grand, but it owns itself, right? And then in the span of the next, say, 10 years, it pays itself off, right? That's the same deal with these self-driving cars, right? So on that, right, Daimler can manufacture cars, and the cars will pay themselves off. At first, they have a loan to Daimler, right? Um, but then the car, as it's driving in an Uber-style network, it pays itself off over the span of 1 year, 3 years, and it should pay itself off quicker because it doesn't have to stop ever, except to refuel, etc. Doesn't need bathroom breaks, anything like that,
Right.
and it's safer than human drivers already, right? So, and same thing with a decentralized solar grid, right? Like, it's not just decentralized; it's fully autonomous. It's a sovereign solar grid, or sovereign solar panel farm, right?
Right. Ah, that is so fucking crazy. That is this is I mean, it's funny. I thought we were gonna come on here and we would stick to like DAOs and DeFi, but you're right. This is all relevant to what we're doing in Web3 because it all has to there has to be a financial layer to this, and or forget even the financial side of it. It is a tokenized system.
Yeah, yeah. And we're gonna, like, in terms of the near term, right? So we talk about, like, interpolate, right? So I talked, maybe there's 10 steps to ASIs and all that, right? But say 3 steps along is things like Nature 2.0, right? But one step along is just some simple self-sovereign real world assets, right? And that are like in real life, physical, not like stocks or something, right?
Sure.
Stocks shouldn't be called real world assets. They're just as intangible as crypto. But anyway, um, but so yeah, like just someone coming along and doing their own self-owning, self-driving car, right?
Right.
And just setting that up, and we're gonna see some basic experiments of this. But then probably someone will, find some model that just takes off and they run with it, right? That's that. So hopefully, by listening to your show or reading some of my writings, they can get inspired and do it, right? So
They should be reading your writings, and if you're not following Trent already, I believe it's Trent MC0 on Twitter.
yeah,
You should be following him. He's obviously a very smart guy, but also has been vouched for through my network of people by some pretty big names and heavy hitters that I respect. Um, I mean, I think we're at a good like kind of like roundup point for the show here, which is you need to be paying attention and you need to stay curious and you need to go and be willing to there is definitely a learning curve here that you gotta grit your teeth through, but go and put the time in to understand where the future is going and where it will certainly be because it's coming no matter whether you want it or you don't want it.
yeah.
Trent, I can't thank you enough, man. This is just an incredible conversation. I got a ton out of it. Selfishly, I like these are combos that I do because I want to have them, and I think others should hear them. Um, but I don't know if there's anything else you want to tell people that any way to support you or ways that they can engage with what you're building. Um, yeah, I don't know if you have anything to plug here.
Not really anything to plug. Like, I mean, overall, right? I come from Ocean, so try out using Ocean. Try out using Predictor. So it's oceanprotocol.com and predictor.ai with two O's,
Two O's.
.ai. Of course, right? Good degen. Run your own bots, make money trading, all that. And then just sort of, yeah, to sort of sync with your closing statement. Uh, Degen yourself, black pill yourself towards this future, right? It's coming no matter what. You can prepare yourself, read sci-fi, embrace the future with eyes wide open, right? And then you can benefit what you do in the near term by interpolating, right? So what's the 10, 20 steps in between? Map that out for yourself, and then ask what's step number one, and start doing it.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Trent, thank you so much again for joining us. And for everybody who tuned in today, thank you for joining. We'll catch you on the next one and we'll see you. Peace.
Thank you.